I don't know if that is. $17. All right. So, tell me, no gaming. I don't know what's going on. I'm gonna have to figure that out tomorrow. I don't know. I don't know if it's fixed or not, but probably just gonna have to deal with it until tomorrow. Until yeah, until tomorrow. I don't know if I'm gonna upload or go try any more games. Nothing. Oh, stinky. Here, I'll do that. What? Your Piper pizza? Yes. Flying poo? Ew. All right. All right. So I can't play a game, apparently. So we're gonna take a look at this.
Total power grid collapse.
We're coming for you, man.
First floor roof is starting to fall in.
It created a humanitarian crisis.
A statewide blackout.
Crazy.
Texas, a state known for its resilience against heat, suddenly finds itself at the mercy of two brutal winter storms. Families are left grappling with the unprecedented cold and days-long power outages. It soon becomes a life-threatening situation. We'll unravel the Great Texas Freeze, from how it became a record holder.
We were out of power for 5 days, I think.
To all the ways this could have been less devastating. When the cold front hit that Wednesday, electric utility crews said they were prepared to respond to all reports of power outages. But this could not have been further from the truth. The next morning, the first weather advisory was issued in northwest Texas. Isolated freezing rain began falling and expanded to neighboring counties after sunset. At 6:30 p.m., a Delta Airlines flight slides off the Pittsburgh International Airport taxiway. With no reports of injuries, passengers were on the aircraft for 3 hours before disembarking. It would be another 24 hours before the plane was removed from the runway. While the Delta incident was quickly managed, it was only the first taste of what was to come as the situation in Texas escalated rapidly. Hours later, the Fort Worth 911 center was inundated with desperate calls.
What do I do? Oh my God. I think I hit Winston. I'm confused. My car was spinning.
There's a gentleman in a car next to me. He's just screaming. I don't know how many cars are packed up. They're all stacked on top of each other.
First responders arrived at a massive car accident involving 133 vehicles. Many of those involved were healthcare workers wearing scrubs.
130. Crazy. And I was in Houston at the time, and I saw this. And I told my crew that I was working with at the time, I was like, nah. I was like, y'all go home. Because we left early that day. And I dropped them back off the hotel. I'm like, y'all go home. Y'all go do whatever you have to do. I'm going home. So go do whatever you have to do. After this happened, it was this afternoon. Once this happened.
First responders arrived at a massive car accident involving 133 vehicles. Many of those involved were healthcare workers wearing scrubs and hospital badges. This included an off-duty EMT who jumped into action, working for hours even though he had a fractured ankle and other injuries from the collision.
We're coming to get you, all right? You hurting anywhere? Can you crawl out if I break this window?
Fire engines subsequently closed off the roadway to prevent further pileups. Nearly 120 emergency responders were on the scene to clear the roadway. Meanwhile, buses arrived to help motorists warm up after being freed from their cars to prevent hypothermia. After a 4-hour operation, the death toll would stand at 6, while more than 60 others were treated for injuries, among them 4 police officers. Due to the storm's severity and the scale of the accident, it would be several more days before the road was cleared. The collision was the most staggering crash during the February 2021 storms, but there were many more to come. As the disaster unfolded, Texas declared a state of emergency. However, the response revealed a significant oversight. Despite prioritizing gas, they relied heavily on electric heating. This revealed a lack of preparedness in managing energy.
There is not, especially where I'm from, there is not a lot of gas. Not. Almost everything's electric. Here at my house, everything's electric. Even at my former house where I lived at, which was right about here. That's Waco. I mean, Waco and Austin. Here. Waco, Austin. I lived right about here. There's no gas. It's all electric.
By the weekend, the freezing temperatures had forced 22 gas power plants to close. The infrastructure, including the production facilities and pipelines, were not designed to operate in such cold conditions.
So all of the gas pipelines closed because it was too cold, because they weren't winterized, because 40 years ago when ever Texas knew about it, they didn't do anything. Now everyone is trying to run electric, and the electric grid is not meant to do this. It's just not.
Conditions. With the demand increased, prices spiked, making heating even more expensive and heightening the risks of power outages. Additionally, shutdowns across critical industries threatened to disrupt the economy, not just locally, but nationwide. As if that was not enough, an unprecedented winter event was heading straight for southeastern Texas. By the afternoon, an Arctic cold front hit with snow, sleet, and freezing rain battering the area and intensified overnight. The storm was driven by 2 weather patterns. First, higher than normal pressure over the polar region meant lower pressure in the northern U.S., letting extremely cold air move into Texas. And second, a polar vortex that pushed down intense bursts of cold from the North Pole. Roads became impassable, and temperatures dropped to the teens or single digits in places with wind chills below 0. This triggered the state's first ever wind chill and hard freeze warnings. Demand for electricity and gas soared as people bitterly tried to stay warm.
Look at all those propane tanks, man. Everyone's trying to just get something to help them stay warm. Like 300 people died from hypothermia because the power was out and they could not keep warm. These people are just trying to keep warm. And we were in the middle of it. That shit was crazy.
Warm in unprepared homes. Due to the overwhelming demand, unplanned outages started happening. And soon, the energy provider ERCOT issued a warning about potential rolling blackouts. That very day, President Joe Biden declared a state of emergency. In the early hours of the morning, ERCOT instructed electric companies to reduce power to prevent a grid shutdown. This action, known as load shedding, resulted in more than 3.6 million people losing electricity. Among those affected were the Beckel family, and it all started with a 911 call.
The fire.
We think medical, a wellness check.
What's going on?
We have family there right now, and the last time somebody spoke to them, they fainted on the phone, and we're just trying to find out if they're okay.
Okay, stand on line for Houston Medical. 1 moment.
The Houston Fire Department knocked on the door 13 minutes later, but left when there was no answer. When dispatch returned the call, he didn't warn the firefighters about possible carbon monoxide poisoning.
Nobody's on the scene, so it's one of those things. If they get there and they have to force entry, they're going to break the door, displace the lock. Yeah, that's fine. Do that as soon as possible. Okay. But this isn't your family member, right? I mean, this is our family. We think that they might have inhaled carbon monoxide in the garage. Why do you think that? Because of people that had called them in the morning. Why would you have been inhaling carbon monoxide is the question? Because the car was on in the garage and they were cooking because the power was out. They were trying to charge their devices. Well, we have units out there. I'll let them know. I'll make a tactical decision on that incident. I'll get HPD out there.
Again, they left without speaking to anyone inside. It had been more than 2 hours since the first call, and the anxious family member had heard
What are
nothing.
we doing, man?
I called 2.5 hours ago for a wellness check. I'm calling for an update.
Okay, so we went out there.
Did you make contact with the people inside the home? I spoke to the fire department earlier. It says the truck was there for 15 minutes, but that's all they could tell me.
Okay, that's
people
the
are still
same
not
thing
on.
I can tell you. So I have the same information they have. There's no other update.
Even though this was the third visit to the house, the fire department got lost. They arrived just around midnight. There was still no response to the knocking. However, this time, they didn't just walk away. Instead, they called with additional questions before entering the house.
They went to the address. They said it looks empty. Why do y'all think someone's there? Or are y'all sure someone's there?
We think that a family of 2 parents and 2 children is unconscious due to carbon monoxide inhalation.
Inside, all 4 family members were found unresponsive. It's believed the family had been unconscious for more than 12 hours before responders arrived.
12 hours.
For the 46-year-old mother and her 7-year-old daughter, it was far too late. They were both pronounced dead.
Yeah, Greg Abbott's bitch ass fucking rolls away like nothing happened.
Dead at the scene. The father and his 8-year-old son were unconscious, but alive, and rushed to the hospital. Tragically, the front door to the family home had been unlocked all along. Later, it was discovered that the mother was using her car to keep warm. When her husband went to the garage, he found her unconscious inside the car with the engine still running. A Conroe family also woke up to an unimaginable tragedy less than 24 hours later. 11-year-old Christian Pavone was found unresponsive in the bed he was sharing with his younger brother. Just hours earlier, Christian had been excited to see snow for the first time after moving to the U.S. from Honduras in 2019 to live with his mom. Tragic home video footage shows him playing in the snow. In hopes of staying warm, the entire family of 5 huddled in a single room in the family's mobile home. Christian was pronounced dead that afternoon, seemingly from hypothermia. But the autopsy would tell a different story, one that would lead to a lawsuit. While families faced the brunt of the storm inside their homes, outside, the state's infrastructure began to crumble under pressure. By this point, many methane gas processing plants had lost power because they weren't listed as essential services. This made it harder to supply gas to power stations. To combat the energy shortfall, regulators manually boosted the electricity supply, but this action triggered a sudden spike in prices, with the residents seeing dramatically higher energy bills.
$71. Let's see if it gets into how much people were paying. Because people were paying that much per hour.
Neighboring states were also affected by the cold, but managed to...
No, it doesn't. People were getting $5,000 electric bills just because of a few days. If they had power. And they were still getting those bills. When they didn't have power.
Import power from the unaffected East Coast. However, this offered little reprieve for Texas, which has a largely autonomous electric grid with limited outside connections. It was 5 days into the storm, and it just kept getting worse. Grocery stores were starting to feel the weight of the supply issues. Customers were limited in the water and propane sales. Meanwhile, there were conflicting statements in the media regarding the blackout. Government officials said that renewable energy was mainly responsible, while ERCOT contradicted this by saying that frozen wind turbines were not the main factor in the blackouts.
The governor of the state blames renewable energy, and the electric company that is in charge of the state said, "What the fuck are you talking about? Yeah, that makes sense.
The following day, temperatures started picking up, but Texans were unaware of what was still to come. As the day progressed, more power generation was restored and the rolling blackouts ended throughout the state.
So as these rolling blackouts happened, I'm going to tell you before the video does. People started to turn on their heats. Once the power came back on, people started turning on their heats, and there goes the energy that they're trying to use. Everyone in the state. What happens? Well, guess what? Fucking the state is not ready for it.
As the power crisis eased up, a new challenge emerged. The extreme weather had caused water mains to break, forcing people to drip their faucets to prevent pipes from freezing. Additionally, power outages impacted water treatment plants, resulting in a decrease in the water system pressure.
So where I lived in Troy, I lived on the east side of 35, just south of Waco, north of Temple. East side, we had water, but our power was out for 5 days. West side, they had power. Their water ended up being out for over 2 weeks. I think it was closer to 3 weeks. They had no water. Couldn't take a shower, couldn't make food, couldn't boil water, couldn't do anything. They had no water.
The consequences were dire. Almost half of Texans were left without access to clean water. Their only option was to boil water from taps or melt snow. Unfortunately, due to the ongoing power outages, many were unable to do so. The severity of the situation was documented on social media, which was flooded with images of people filling buckets with water. And resorting to makeshift solutions like using plastic bags and toilets. The power outages even disrupted food distribution, causing some to be turned away from queues. But for some, it was even worse. Burst pipes and water mains caused severe flooding in some homes and apartments. Most houses had their water mains buried in the front yard, hidden under layers of snow, making it hard for residents to locate the shutoff valve. While residents struggled with frozen water mains, another emergency unfolded. Firefighters were called to a blaze at the Hilton Garden Inn. They arrived at the hotel
Full screen, counter. What am I at? Yeah. My stomach does not feel great. That we're saying, oh yeah, you get to fucking drink and eat hot dogs. What kind of punishment is that? Have fun next year.
Where flames and huge columns of smoke were rising from the roof. The hotel was booked to capacity, with locals occupying most of the 102 rooms due to the severe weather, which had left them with limited or no access to water at their homes.
4 rooms are starting to fall in. If we're going to start going checking there, we need to start forcing the door. No time for keys. Some type of Salvation Army response. We got a large number of displaced residents. A large number.
2 days before the fire, frozen pipes had caused flooding in the hotel lobby. To prevent further damage, the fire sprinkler system was turned off. Unfortunately, this left the building vulnerable. When the fire started, the disabled sprinklers let the fire spread quickly. Firefighting was made even harder because burst pipes had also damaged the city's water supply. Firefighters were able to contain the blaze after midnight. 1 guest suffered minor injuries, and 2 others were treated for smoke inhalation. Sadly, a family pet named Chico the Chihuahua was lost in the fire.
Are you kidding me? Always the fucking animals, man.
Just before the 9th day, the Great Freeze was finally over. But for victims affected by the power crisis, their fight was only just beginning. And it was time to figure out why things had gone so horribly wrong. Was the Great Freeze really unprecedented? And was it a coincidence that Texas was caught so off guard?
No.
The main issue was undoubtedly the high energy demand for heating in an unprepared state. The disaster was blamed on unprecedented weather, but it was somewhat predictable. This was the 3rd time recommendations were ignored. Surprisingly, the situation could have been much worse. During the power outage, ERCOT admitted in narrowly avoiding a prolonged blackout that could have lasted for months. The company defended its actions, which resulted in the largest forced power cut in U.S. history. Approximately 90% of Texans rely on ERCOT for their electricity, which primarily comes from sources like natural gas, wind, and coal. Despite its crucial role, ERCOT does not operate its own power grid. Instead, it works with over 1,800 companies, providers, and utilities in the energy market to manage the supply of electricity. Tragically, at least 19 people died from carbon monoxide poisoning during the storm. Among them was 11-year-old Christian Pavone, whose autopsy revealed a similar cause of death. Initially suspected to have succumbed to hypothermia, it was later found that carbon monoxide poisoning was the actual culprit. Investigators found the fatal fumes were caused by a gas-powered generator intended for outdoor use. Notably, Texas is among 6 states without a mandate for carbon monoxide alarms. Soon, thousands of Texans filed lawsuits against ERCOT for deaths, injuries, and damages. But they would fail. The Supreme Court ruled that the energy supplier has sovereign immunity, which protects government agencies that provide essential services.
Let that sink in.
There were 246 deaths in total, but even this was debated by the community. The storms caused $80 to $130 billion in losses from damages and missed opportunities. Nearly a year later, the National Transportation Safety Board's investigation into the 133-car pileup found that road operators had been warned about the severe weather. While de-icer was applied to the road surface,
We don't have the infrastructure for it. There's not enough people.
temperatures dropped lower than expected, which led to
Did not drop lower than expected. We knew several days beforehand. The state and the cities, especially in DFW, did not do what they were supposed to do, which was ask for fucking help.
treacherous road conditions. Since then, Texas has passed Senate Bill 3, which mandates the weatherization of energy infrastructure to withstand extreme weather and requires regular compliance inspections. ERCOT improved its response to emergencies and public communication, creating a more reliable grid. The Public Utility Commission of Texas also strengthened management and enforcement to ensure compliance with new standards. Furthermore, public awareness campaigns have educated residents on home insulation,
Here's the problem. Hold on.
emergency preparations, and the dangers of carbon monoxide poisoning. But questions remain. Will these measures handle future extreme weather? Will weatherization finally be a priority? And most importantly, is Texas prepared for future storms?
No. The answer is fucking no. They estimated 20 years that it was going to take to winterize the entire state. 20 years. 20. And someone came out with a report a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, where everything was behind and it was going to take years to catch up to it. It's not happening. The state fucking sucks.
Watch this episode next. If you found this video
true speed of modern nuclear weapons. That's cool, but it's an hour long. Mom finds severed head in her. People are fucking crazy. What is this one?
Let's see. Before diving into the chronology of events, I want to just provide a quick overview of some important technical topics. I actually have a series of videos explaining the power grid in greater detail linked below, so check that out if you want to learn more. A wide area interconnection, which is the technical term for a power grid, is the solution to the number one problem of the supply and demand of electricity: volatility. There aren't many feasible ways to store large quantities of electricity, so for the most part, the supply and demand have to be matched simultaneously. Electricity is produced, transmitted, and consumed all in the exact same instant.
They have to be produced simultaneously, but they don't have to be produced exactly. So keep that in mind. So just because the power need here doesn't mean it needs to be here. It can be up here. Okay? So it can be well above it, and that's what it's supposed to be.
Managing those ebbs and flows is a very difficult thing to do unless large groups of power producers and users are connected together, smoothing out the volatility of demands, making them more predictable, and the supply, making it possible to have larger, more efficient generating facilities. Interconnection.
Here, hold on. Like, this right here. Okay? So this is the capacity, what they're prepared for. This is what the need is. Okay? So these lines don't have to match up. The purple is absolutely supposed to be above the teal right here. Okay?
Increases the efficiency and reliability of electricity supply, and the majority of Texans are served by a single interconnection that covers most of the state. I'll be referring to it as the Texas power grid. Just because there are so many power producers and users interconnected doesn't mean there is no volatility in supply and demand. These are some example demand curves on the Texas grid. You can see that demand is always changing throughout the day. When power demand drops due to mild weather or at night when people are asleep, we need generators to shut down. Otherwise, the frequency of the AC power will speed up above 60 Hz. When demand spikes, we need generators spun up to match it. Otherwise, the extra load will bog down the physical generators and the frequency of the AC power will fall below 60 Hz. The consequences of the AC frequency deviating by too much are massive because every generator in the entire system is magnetically coupled. If parts of the system lose synchronization, both generators and equipment connected to the grid can tear themselves apart. Because of that, most parts of the grid, including generation facilities, have breakers that trip to isolate equipment if the frequency deviates too far. The breakers in your house monitor electrical current. If you plug in too many things to one circuit, the breaker will trip. These work in the exact same way, except they monitor frequency. And unlike in your house where restoring power is a quick fix, large power generating stations don't turn on and off with the flip of a switch. So matching supply and demand to maintain a stable frequency is the most critical part of managing the power grid. In Texas, the entity in charge of this task is ERCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas. This is a nonprofit corporation with board members representing basically every segment of the electricity market, from generators to utilities to consumers. ERCOT's job is to oversee the entire system. They don't own or operate any facilities themselves, but they tell operators of generation facilities when to start and stop running, depending on the electrical demand. ERCOT also manages scheduled outages. Owners have to have approval from ERCOT before they take facilities offline for maintenance. Finally, ERCOT manages the wholesale market of electricity by setting prices and handling the transactions between power sellers and buyers. The week before Valentine's Day 2021 had already been a wintry one in many parts of Texas, but as the weekend drew near, the forecast started to make clear that the next week would be extraordinarily cold. On February 8th, a full week before things really hit the fan, ERCOT had already started issuing public communications about very high expected electrical demands across the state. They canceled or delayed approval for a large number of scheduled outages to make sure that as much electrical infrastructure as possible would be in service in anticipation of the storm. They worked with the Texas Railroad Commission, which confusingly is in charge of the oil and gas industry, to increase the priority of delivering natural gas to power plants. They also worked with the U.S. Department of Energy to get permission for some power plants to temporarily exceed their emission limits from the EPA during peak needs for electricity. All this to say, the folks managing the power grid were expecting exceptional strain on the system and had already started working the week beforehand to prepare. When the storm did hit on Valentine's Day, it really was one for the history books. 3 major facts to illustrate this point. First, it was extremely cold. This figure from the National Weather Service shows the departure from normal temperatures for 3 historical winter weather events in the southern U.S. plains. The one on the right is the 2021 event. Essentially, the entire southern U.S. had average temperatures more than 25 degrees Fahrenheit or 15 degrees Celsius below normal. All-time low temperature records were set in nearly every city across the region. It was the coldest many places had practically ever been. The next point, which you can see also in this figure, is that it was not just a local event. This storm had significant impacts across the entire state of Texas and beyond. Finally, the duration of frigid temperatures was just so long. This figure from the National Weather Service shows that large portions of the state were below freezing for more than 7 continuous days. That might not seem like a lot to those of you in northern climes, maybe even a welcome respite, but in most parts of Texas, it is unheard of. The state started Sunday with about a quarter of its total electrical capacity already out of service, mainly due to the weather the week before. These outages were about half wind power and half natural gas generators. Even with that lack of capacity, as night began to fall that Sunday, Texas hit its all-time winter peak electrical demand of nearly 70,000 megawatts, and it met that full demand. The previous peak was 66,000. Everyone in the state was running their heaters to the max trying to stay warm. As the evening continued, though, it became clear to ERCOT and the utilities that the amount of electricity available on the grid may not be able to continue to meet the demand. An advisory was issued that electrical reserves were low at around 11. .30 p.m. Not long after that, generation facility after facility started tripping offline, reducing the capacity to meet the high demand. Texas has a diverse portfolio of power generators. The largest segment of that is natural gas, making up about half of the capacity. The second segment is wind turbines at about 30%. The rest of the generation fleet is made up of coal-powered plants, nuclear plants, and solar farms. This graph shows the outages of each generation type during the winter storm. You can see that wind and natural gas make up the majority of the lost capacity, but no type of power plant was spared during the storm. The most important part of this figure is the natural gas line. Plant after plant went offline to the tune of 15,000 megawatts of capacity within the span of 8 hours. All the details are still coming out about what really happened, but there was a lot that we know went wrong. Natural gas wells and pipelines are particularly vulnerable to cold temperatures. Not only does a gas stream contain water vapor that can freeze by itself, that water vapor can also combine with hydrocarbons to create hydrates that solidify at temperatures well above freezing. Combine this with the fact that many roads were completely impassable during the storm, it was nearly impossible for some gas suppliers to keep things flowing. That despite the fact that the wholesale price of natural gas during the storm skyrocketed to more than 100 times its normal price due to the incredible demand, with power plants competing with residential homes that use gas for heat. At that price, suppliers were doing essentially everything in their power to deliver gas to customers, but it just wasn't enough. Or in some cases it was enough, but the generators couldn't afford to operate their plants with such a high cost for fuel. But it wasn't just gas power plants that struggled, and it wasn't just about fuel. Wind turbines were shut down due to icing, solar panels were covered in snow, one of the few nuclear units in Texas tripped offline because of cold weather issues with its water supply. Basically, the entire system was ill-prepared for a storm of this magnitude. Texas does have a few connections to other power grids to help alleviate supply problems during emergencies, but those grids were suffering under similar conditions without much extra electricity to spare. This graph shows the total outages during the event. With that huge spike of generators going offline the morning after Valentine's Day, the state had nearly half its total capacity gone during one of the highest periods of electrical demand on record. Without any remaining reserve of resources, ERCOT had only one option left to keep supply and demand in sync: shed load. This is the technical term for what is essentially turning off parts of the power grid, in other words, disconnecting customers to reduce total demands on the system. Here's a simplified version of how this works. ERCOT tells the transmission operators they need to take X megawatts off the grid. Those megawatts are distributed roughly evenly between the operators you may have heard of, like Oncor, CenterPoint, CPS Energy, Austin Energy, etc., based on their share of the total load. Each operator has a plan in place for how to shed load within their system when required. It's not something they decide on the fly. Certain circuits critical to public health and safety, like hospitals, are prioritized. The other non-critical circuits are usually shut off in a rolling manner at 15 to 30-minute intervals. That way the inconvenience of lost service is spread out more evenly across the entire service area. Of course, in many places during the storm, that is not what happened. And this graph is the key to why. As more and more resources tripped offline so quickly, the frequency of the Texas power grid began to drop. ERCOT continued ordering additional load to be shed from the system, trying to keep up with both the rising demand from the cold weather and the quickly failing power plants. At about 1:50 a.m., the frequency fell below 59.4 Hz. It doesn't sound that significant, but this is a critical threshold for grid stability. Power plant controls are set to automatically disconnect if the frequency stays below 59.4 Hz for more than 9 minutes. In such a situation, as each generator trips, the frequency would quickly plummet until just about every circuit breaker on the grid had disconnected. 4 minutes and 37 seconds is all that separated Texas from a complete grid collapse. Without the urgent action to continue shedding load from the system, many might still be without power in Texas a month later. That's because recovering from a complete collapse, called a black start of the power grid, is an immense technical challenge. So much equipment would need to be inspected, repaired, or replaced from the damage caused by the collapse. Only then could we start bringing generators and customers online slowly but surely to maintain balance between supply and demand throughout the process. If anything goes wrong during a black start and frequency deviates too far, breakers will trip to protect the equipment and you have to start all over. I am not an economist, but the energy market is an important part of this story, so I'll do my best to summarize the key points here. Unlike other markets that pay generators to secure capacity for the future, the wholesale electricity market in Texas is energy only. That means if you put power on the grid, you get paid for it. You get no extra points for having generation capacity when it wasn't needed. The only reason it's feasible to invest in future capacity is the scarcity pricing of wholesale electricity. When demand is high, the price goes way up. In theory, this incentivizes generators to not only make short-term investments to ensure their facilities are up and running during peak demands, but also long-term investments in plants that can spin up during these times when prices are sky high to capitalize on the energy scarcity. This type of price model also favors intermittent sources of electricity like wind and solar, which would struggle to compete in a market that valued firm capacity. While it normally varies between $30 and $50 per megawatt hour on an average day, the wholesale electricity price went up to the cap of $9,000 per megawatt hour during the storm and stayed that high for days. The result was that providers spent more money on wholesale electricity in a week than would normally be spent in 4 average years. That's with the extreme load shedding that occurred and doesn't include the incredible prices that some utilities had to pay for natural gas. Most energy users won't see those massive costs, at least not right away. That's because nearly every retail provider offers a fixed or at least tiered rate for electricity to their customers. bearing the dips and swings of the wholesale price using a wide variety of financial tools and long-term contracts to try and hedge against the extreme volatility. Prudent planning can only take you so far in an event like this, though, and at least one utility has already filed for bankruptcy protection after the extreme energy bill came due. Other retail energy providers used a different strategy to manage the market unpredictability, pass the risk on to their customers by offering direct access to wholesale energy rates for a monthly fee. The idea is that some users may prefer to manage their own demand, cutting back on electricity usage when rates are high and shifting usage to times when rates are low. Unfortunately, many of these customers were misled about or misunderstood the incredible volatility of the wholesale energy market to which they were being exposed, and there are many reports of residential energy bills in the thousands of dollars. During the peak of the event, ERCOT ordered 20,000 megawatts of load to be shed from the system. That's the equivalent of turning off half of Texas on a normal day. And the load shed orders lasted for 3 days straight, from early morning on the 15th to the end of the 18th. What should have been rolling outages couldn't roll, because many utilities didn't have any non-critical should have been rolling 3 days straight, from early morning on the 15th to the end of the 18th. What should have been rolling outages couldn't roll, because many utilities didn't have any non-critical circuits on their system left to turn off. The result was that millions of Texans were plunged into darkness, in some cases for days, without heat or light during one of the coldest winter storms on record. My house lost power in the middle of the second night of outages, and it was already 42 degrees Fahrenheit or 6 degrees Celsius that morning before we relocated to a family member's house. And we were the lucky ones. Many were not so fortunate to have friends or family with power nearby, or even to have roads clear enough to safely make the trek. The selection of which circuits were left on versus off seemed arbitrary or even capricious to many. Water utilities started losing service both because of frozen lines and lack of power available for pumping, reducing the availability of yet another basic human necessity to huge swaths of the population. Even though we had avoided the catastrophe of a total grid collapse, we did not avoid a crisis. Many lives were lost, and the economic impacts of this emergency are untold. I have my own opinions about what could have or should have been done better during the storm and by whom, but this is not the place. My goal with this video is to try to summarize the facts of this tragic event in a way that is approachable by people who don't have a working knowledge of the intricacies of the power grid. Many are still recovering from the storm and will be for years to come. Please feel free to share your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. All I ask is that you be kind and respectful to one another. Thank you for
you start thinking about like crazy things, like whenever you're cold. You know, I'm sitting there thinking about things that I can light on fire in my living room.
It was the first time I saw how fast established order could absolutely disintegrate.
It brings me tears to even think about it now, because I lost so much that I can't replace.
Hello.
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 Yeah, it's a good time. I'm on lunch now. I appreciate you even offering to talk to me about it. It was just a bad situation that I'll never forget, to be honest.
This is a severe weather alert.
We could be talking about record cold we haven't seen in decades.
It is a perfect storm to bring the coldest of the air right down into Texas.
Are pipes going to burst? Are we going to see power outages, rolling blackouts because of demand?
This is a real threat.
When I first heard about Texas getting snow, I honestly thought it was a joke.
At the time, I kind of looked through my pantry to see if I had some canned goods.
The typical preparations that you make.
I do have a little generator, so I went to get fuel. The only service station I could find that was open in Athens only had diesel and it had premium, so I had to buy premium gasoline to put in my generator.
I thought it was going to be just 1 or 2 days.
Last one, guys.
I did not realize the storm was going to last for a full week.
Fucking over.
It was Valentine's Day when it started snowing.
It was kind of joyous because we don't have snow very often in Texas.
My dog loved it, rolled in it, shoved her nose in it, had a great time that first day, not being particularly worried.
Everywhere was covered in snow. I mean, like everywhere. I mean, it was beautiful. It looked pretty. However, when we lost power, that was when, my daughter began to panic.
I just really was not prepared. And on the news, they said that we were going to have rolling blackouts, meaning like our electricity was going to be cut off for a certain amount of time and then it will pop back on. Well, that didn't happen.
So nearly 3 million customers without power this morning.
Rolling outages, power outages across the state.
That leaves up to 2 million Texans without guaranteed warmth for what looks to be an incredibly frigid night ahead.
Power went out for about 30 minutes to an hour. But then it came back on. We were able to finish dinner and everything was fine. And then it's off for like 2 or 3 more hours. It was probably about 15, 18 degrees outside. My mother-in-law's COPD, once the temperature gets down to about 60, it starts getting a little rough. The house was dropping to about 40s. It gets to the point where the mother-in-law is struggling so much to breathe that we can't do anything about it. Her oxygen machine's not working. We can't maintain oxygen levels, so we had to call 911.
There is a moment of panic that goes through your mind because you actually don't know how cold it's going to get.
One of my neighbors across the way, they're in their late 60s, resorted to chopping up some of their furniture to burn as heat, as a source for heat.
At night, my son would run the car all night, and him and a few of the kids, they would swap out in the car to stay warm, and I stayed in my room underneath just as many blankets as I can.
The biggest story for me was the helplessness around making sure my parents were okay. Because like without heat, I was concerned with both of their fragile health, that was gonna, that was a deadly situation for them.
I was stuck in the dark with no electricity for 72 hours. And it was cold. Every time I breathed, I could see my breath. I was sad, I was angry, I was confused. I literally cried.
By the time we even thought about going to the store, the shelves were already empty. People were waiting in these lines for hours and hours just to get like bread and milk.
I have 6 children, and I'm a disabled veteran. And so I lived check to check, and I didn't have very much food in the house. I remember I told the kids that we should probably go to the store the next day. The next morning, the ice had already covered over the roads. So when we tried to go anywhere, the car just started sliding, and so we didn't go nowhere. We just came back home. There was only a couple of days worth of food. We ate once a day, and it was like a can of raviolis, and everybody just kind of shared it. It looked like the end of the world had happened.
Hang in there, folks. Only a couple more nights of this winter storm before it starts to feel like Texas again.
And we are not out of the woods yet. We're going to have another hard freeze tonight, which could put your pipes at risk again.
We left right before the next snowstorm hit because it was just getting too cold, and we didn't want to be in the apartment without any power for days. When we came back, I think the end of the week, found out that my apartment had flooded.
It was just shocking. We were splashing on our carpets and just seeing pictures that had gone on the ground, ruined.
It just hurt me more that my daughter had to shed tears and cry. It damaged her room the most, so a lot of her things had to be thrown away. There's people who lost things that, you can't replace.
My parakeets froze. They died because it was too cold. Some of my fish died, and I lost a goat.
The older horses just became lethargic, and they couldn't get up. One of them, we actually had to put it down ourselves. It's hard to not feel guilty that you couldn't do anything.
My sick father, he contracted COVID. He chose to self-quarantine because he didn't want to obviously spread COVID to everybody. And for a heart patient, somebody whose blood doesn't get pumped through their system like the rest of us, it's really bad to even go 30 minutes without heat in the house. And he was also at the time using a CPAP machine, and all of that goes away when there's no electricity. He passed away on the 22nd. I regret not going over and checking on him.
There is a bit of encouraging news this morning. The temperatures later today are expected to get back above freezing for the first time since this past weekend.
This cold snap has really been something for the record books, that's for sure.
When the power came back on, I think we all cheered. We all was trying to argue over who's gonna get in the tub first.
Honestly, I think the first thing that was on everybody's mind was showers.
Turn the heater on and turn it up. And then checking on my neighbors to make sure that their power had come back on too.
It was really heartwarming to see how everyone pitched in and helped each other out. We saw the best in each other during this time, and I like to think there's just something uniquely Texan about looking out for our neighbors.
We would check on each other, us neighbors, because we live in a big building.
The community, everybody in Odom was getting together and giving each other pipes so they can fix their pipes, and neighbors and everybody else. We all did it together.
I actually just got back from Florida. When we got our first cold snap, I've just made up in my mind, I won't stay here again for that. Yeah, I don't think I want to live through that ever again.
Well, why every time I talk about it, I sound like I'm scared, but I guess I am. I don't want to go through that anymore. We have water, we have food, we bought a generator.
We bought a generator.
We were going to invest in a generator.
And just considered that part of our life now.
I don't think any Texan is happy with how ERCOT handled the situation.
I don't think Texas is a bad state, and I don't think it's mismanaged overall, but this is a specific thing that really needs some serious addressing.
Since the grid hasn't really been repaired, I feel like this is going to happen again.
Well, absolutely. It will happen again.
I signed 12 new laws after that storm to make sure that our power grid is resilient and reliable and stable, even during the harshest of winter storms.
Him and Governor Perry are a fucking joke. The insane lies about the Texas
An enormous
blackout.
winter storm hit Texas and knocked out power to millions of Texans, and the experts knew exactly how it happened.
Coal, gas, and nuclear have equipment literally freezing over, seizing up.
Some of the maintenance and the up.
What am I at right now? 21 I'm on beer 30 right now. Hey-o. All right, guys. Talking to myself. That's all right. I will be right back. We're gonna finish this punishment on stream like it was meant to be. I made it for the finale. It. Oh. Half a beer. You know what? I'm at 20-9 right now. Have half a beer. Yeah. My 2 cents into it was not enjoyable. My back hurts. Sitting in this fucking chair. My wife brought me a bottle of water and ibuprofen. Take before I pass the fuck out. I have a headache. Probably from staring at this fucking computer monitor for 10 hours. Do not recommend it. So, but I will finish strong. I appreciate it, man. Thank you for one person out of our entire group. One person out of our entire group to be here at the finish. I appreciate it. And it's the commish. Crazy. That's, you know, you say an admirable finish. Honestly, it's an admirable show by you to show up. Totally didn't have to do that, by the way. Well, I feel like I did. I feel like I have to set the precedent for every single league that comes after us. This is something that we're going to pass down to our kids, our grandkids. It's needed. It's almost like a here, fucking
I killed those people. That's what I can be. No, you can't. You're not.
I killed those
Whatever
bears.
God needs me to be. Call it in.
I'm with the fantasy league.
A hero. Not the hero we deserved, but the hero we needed. Nothing less than a knight. Shining.
He'll hunt you. You'll hunt me. You'll condemn me. dog's on me.
7 dogs on me.
Because that's what needs to happen. Because sometimes truth isn't good enough. Sometimes people deserve more.
This for y'all.
Sometimes people deserve to have their faith rewarded.
Why is he running, Dad?
Because we have to chase him.
Okay, we're going in. Go!
Gotta chase me, baby.
He didn't do anything wrong.
Just doing what's necessary.
It deserves, but not the one it needs right now. So we'll hunt him. Because he can take it.
I can take it.
Because he's not our hero. He's a silent guardian, a watchful protector.